My name is Tanika Haywell Jennings, and I was born in 1985, so that makes me 34. And I was born in Cheongju-si, South Korea, so Cheongju City. I came to the United States when I was 3 months old. I was adopted into a white American family that lived in New Jersey. In comparison to some friends I have who are adoptees who grew up in the Midwest, per se, I had a kind of different experience. I had more Asian American, Korean American influences in my life, and I identified primarily as Asian American and Korean American, and not as much as an adoptee. I wouldn't say I didn't have any racial identity issues, but I would call it more of an ethnic identity journey. That's where I have a very similar story to most transracial inter-country adoptees, in that my parents, I think, expected me to identify more as white, or to just identify as a non-racialized person. For me, being Asian American and being Korean American, particularly growing up on the East Coast, meant diversity, diversity of ethnicities that are part of Asian American identity, diversities among what it means to be Korean American. I was an adoptee. I had friends who were of all different kinds of backgrounds, religions, worldviews, upbringings. And then I think coming to the Midwest for college, there was a much more, I felt, homogenous kind of sense around being Asian American and particularly Korean American. And in the college I went to was a faith-based school, so there was an even more homogenous kind of identity around what it meant to be Korean American. I think that, if anything, threw me into an identity crisis. I enjoyed the academic rigor at some sense, I guess, of my college experience, but it was not a place where I would say I had a very happy sense of self, at least definitely ethnically. And so I think once that I graduated from college and moved to the city of Chicago, I began to look more for a sense of myself. Around that time, I met the Korean transracial adoptee group in Chicago called Catch, and I think that opened up an entirely new world to me that I had never even kind of considered. When I met Catch for the first time, I was really weirded out by the whole experience, because for me, being a Korean adoptee meant being a party of one, and I was familiar with how to navigate having a very kind of different internal dialogue, and then having a certain kind of external dialogue around being Korean American, being Asian American, etc. And although I would say I was struggling to really understand myself in that way at that time, post-college, it took me a long time, I think, to feel comfortable in that space and to really feel like I had a strong group identity. Originally, when I met Hana Center, it was two different organizations. It was Korean American Community Services, and it was Korean American Resource and Cultural Center. I think I just kind of gravitated towards KRCC. They were really open to adoptees, and something I didn't know at the time was that they'd always had adoptees in leadership positions in that organization, and always had a strong sense of home for adoptees. They're really strong on advocacy and human rights and progressive issues impacting the Korean and Asian American community. So I think through the local Korean adoptee community, I started to get more involved with that. And I'd always been interested in human rights issues and social justice, and had just not really had, again, a language, I think, or a community to understand what that meant for myself, outside of it being what is a majority culture, more of typically a black and white dialogue. Where do Asian American and Korean American human rights fit in? And so I think I was drawn to that work, and as I was understanding myself more deeply in the history of Korean adoption and some of the human rights issues and abuses that go along with that, I really was becoming more deeply open and able to be engaged. I joined the board of the Korean American Resource and Cultural Center, and then those two organizations, KRCC and CACS, merged. At the same time, we were doing more work around Korean adoptee human rights issues, specifically starting to do advocacy work around the Adoptee Citizenship Act, and trying to activate the first national network of adoptees focused on human rights issues. Through this merger of these two amazing organizations, I joined the staff, and I just kind of kept diving in And at this point, I'm deeply involved in Catch, the Korean adoptee community, and then working with Adoptees for Justice, which was formerly known as Adoptee Rights Campaign, and then with Hana Center, KRCC and CAX, and it's just all merging together and becoming something very beautiful and a way to continue doing the work that I have been doing in advocacy and organizing, but in a very much more personal sense. My adoptive father has passed a few years ago, and it was an event in my life that had a big impact on me. One thing that he had said when he was kind of like getting towards the end, he kept talking about living life with no regrets. I think similar to how I try to appreciate the chaos and the beauty of life and the choice and the no choice at the same time. I like what my adoptive father said in the sense that I try not to live life thinking about regrets. There's always things that we could do better as people, but I feel extremely thankful not just for any particular thing. I'm not what you would classify as a quote-unquote grateful adoptee, but I probably am not also what some people might try to say angry adoptee. I don't appreciate those definitions, and I guess I don't think of life in terms of regrets very often. I more so think about how to live every day to the very fullest. To me, to be Korean American means whatever we as Korean Americans define it to be. One pretty maybe interesting lens that I think as adoptees we bring to being Korean American is that we have a little bit of more of an unusual story. I think about 1 in 17 Korean Americans is an adoptee, so we're not that unusual, but we do tend to challenge dominant narratives, I think, around what it means to be Korean American and not fit like a very stereotyped version, just like lots of Korean Americans. And so to me, the important thing is that we center always those who are most impacted by something to understand what that thing is. And so if we are talking about what it means to be Korean American, to me, exactly what the Legacy Project is helps define that. We go out and we find every Korean American that we can, and we try not to privilege one story over another. So to me, it's just our collective experiences and history and culture that we have inherited, and the culture that we make, and what a friend of mine calls sometimes our new citizenship that we make when we haven't had choices over parts of our lives. And that community, to me, that's what it means to be Korean American, just our collective Korean American experiences. One thing that I think is very much part of my being part of this community and is part of my working at Hana Center and being active with the Korean adoptee community is the pain that I think many of us are experiencing in this current social political moment. And the trauma that we're experiencing. Some of us are re-experiencing things like for adoptees, this notion of family separation and what's happening to some of the kids and the families at the border is extremely triggering. I think to me it goes along with, again, how do we understand ourselves as Korean Americans, as immigrants, as adoptees. For me, it's hard not to just cry for the world and for the things that we do to each other. We seem to forget our history so quickly, where we came from, things like war and poverty, not even having enough to eat, or having someone who try to control us or take away our dignity, our human rights. We forget so quickly, and we want to embrace that model minoritiness. Why can't we embrace our shared liberation instead? Can we not build coalition as people who have been impacted by injustice, by people who know love and who also know fear? Can we not come together and be more united in calling out some of these anti-immigrant attacks for what they are and some of this hate for what it is? And it's not just about calling it out to me, but can we be brave and put our money and our time and our resources into things that advance a more just, more loving world? I'm so thankful to know people who are brave and to be mentored and to be challenged by the people impacted by injustice around me who are fighting every day, and wishing that for our community, that we can experience the freedom that comes not out of trying to, please any status quo or meet any status quo, but that comes out of really knowing who we are, whatever that means, in our Korean Americanness, and then giving that, and not being afraid of where that will take us. I really wish for our community that we can build that multi-generation of people. That's the thing that we bring, like folks like adoptees who challenge those narratives. I don't think everyone's ready to experience that from us, but I think we have the ability to challenge things in our community in a unique way. We remind people that there is no one identity, and then hopefully people can look inside themselves and realize that they themselves are not just this very like cloistered off person, and we're all just so related to each other. My name is Tanika Jennings, and this is my Korean American story.